I did not know that a house could die until I heard the Ashford Manor take its last mechanical breath at midnight. The silence that followed was not peace, but the kind of stillness that comes when something meant to live has stopped. I had arrived at the manor only that morning, the 15th of November, 1887, with everything I owned folded into a single carpet bag and a letter of reference so faded the ink had nearly surrendered to time. The position was for a housemaid, nothing more, nothing grand, but after 6 months of sleeping in the cold room above the bakery in Leeds and scrubbing floors until my knuckles bled, even the promise of regular meals and a bed in a manor house felt like providence. I was 22 years old. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with my body and everything to do with my heart. My father had died 2 years before, and with him had gone the only person who ever believed I was more than the daughter of a blacksmith, more than a girl who should have known her place. The carriage that brought me from the village let me off at the servants' entrance just as the afternoon light was failing. November in Yorkshire is a grey and merciless thing, and the wind that came down from the moors carried the smell of rain and peat smoke. The manor itself rose before me like something out of a fever dream, all dark stone and leaded glass, with towers that seemed to pierce the low clouds. I had heard stories about Ashford Manor in the village. They said the master, Thaddeus Ashford, was a recluse and a genius, that he had built a system inside the house unlike anything in England, a network of pipes and engines that brought hot water and light and warmth to every room without the need for servants to carry coal or candles. They said he had not left the grounds since his wife died 3 years ago. They said the house itself was alive. I did not believe in such things. I believed in work and wages and the small dignity of surviving another day. The housekeeper who met me at the door was a narrow woman named Mrs. Iris Colton, with a face like a hatchet and eyes that took my measure in a single glance. She did not smile. She told me the rules as she led me through the dim corridors, her keys jangling at her waist like a jailer's chain. I was to rise at 5. I was to keep my eyes down and my questions to myself. I was never, under any circumstances, to enter the east wing where Mr. Ashford kept his private study and laboratory. I was never to touch the system. The system, she said, was the heart of the house, and it was not for the likes of me to understand. I nodded. I said, "Yes, ma'am." I did not tell her that my father had been a smith and an engineer, that he had let me watch him work since I was old enough to hold a wrench, that I knew the language of metal and pressure and heat better than I knew the language of polite conversation. I did not tell her that I had spent my childhood in a forge, learning things a girl was not supposed to learn. There was no point. Women like Mrs. Colton did not care what a housemaid knew. They cared only that she obeyed. The room I was given was on the 3rd floor, a narrow cell with a single window that looked out over the moor. The bed was hard, the blanket thin, but it was mine, and that was enough. I unpacked my few belongings, hung my spare dress on the peg, and tried not to think about the fact that I was alone in a house full of strangers, in a place that felt like the edge of the world. Dinner was served to the staff in the kitchen at 6, a silent and joyless affair. There were 8 of us in total. Mrs. Colton presided over the table like a magistrate. Beside her sat Mr. Garrett Grimsby, the estate manager, a man with thinning hair and a mouth that turned down at the corners as if he had tasted something sour and never recovered. There was a cook, 2 other maids, a groundskeeper, and a young man named Timothy who worked in the stables. No one spoke to me. No one asked where I had come from or why I was there. They ate their bread and mutton in silence, and I understood that this was a house where questions were not welcome. After dinner, Mrs. Colton gave me a candle and told me to retire. The system, she said, would take care of the rest. I did not understand what she meant until I climbed the stairs to my room and saw that the lamps along the corridor were already lit, glowing softly without flame, their light fed by some unseen force. I paused, staring at them, and felt a strange unease settle in my chest. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also unnatural, as if the house had been given a will of its own. I reached my room and closed the door. I undressed and washed my face in the basin, the water still faintly warm though no one had brought it. The system, I thought. I climbed into bed and pulled the thin blanket over me, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. There was a hum beneath everything, a low and steady vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the floors, from the very bones of the manor. It was the sound of the engines, I realized, the great mechanical heart that Mrs. Colton had spoken of. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I do not know what woke me. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was the silence. I opened my eyes and lay very still, listening. The hum was gone. The house was utterly quiet, and the air in my room had already begun to turn cold. I sat up, my breath misting in the darkness, and reached for the candle I had left on the table beside the bed. My hands were shaking. I did not know why. Then I heard it, a sound like a great exhalation, a mechanical sigh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then nothing at all. I rose and pulled my shawl around my shoulders, my heart beating too fast. I opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The lamps that had glowed so steadily before were dark now, and the cold was already spreading through the house like a living thing. I heard voices below, confused and frightened, the sound of doors opening, footsteps on the stairs. I followed the noise down to the main hall, where I found the other servants gathered in their night clothes, holding candles, their faces pale and uncertain. Mrs. Colton stood in the center of the group, her face rigid with something that might have been fear or fury. I could not tell. "The system has failed," she said, her voice sharp. "No one is to leave this hall. Mr. Grimsby has gone to wake Mr. Ashford." The words hung in the air like a pronouncement of doom. The system has failed. I looked around at the others, at their frightened faces, and felt a cold certainty settle over me. This was not an accident. This was not a simple malfunction. Something had gone wrong, yes, but it had gone wrong in a way that felt deliberate, calculated, as if someone had reached into the heart of the house and stopped it beating. I did not know then that I was right. I did not know that before the night was over, I would see a ghost. I did not know that the man who would come down those stairs, pale and furious and beautiful in his despair, would change everything I thought I understood about duty and desire and the price of truth. I only knew that the house had died, and that somehow, impossibly, I would be the one to bring it back to life. He came down the stairs like a man descending into his own execution, and I could not look away. Thaddeus Ashford was younger than I had imagined, perhaps 35, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of smoke before a storm. He wore no jacket, only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and there was something almost violent in the way he moved, as if he were holding himself back from breaking into a run or shattering something with his bare hands. He did not look at any of us. His gaze went straight to the darkened lamps, to the cold air that had already turned our breath to vapor, and I saw his jaw tighten with a fury so controlled it was more frightening than shouting would have been. "Mr. Grimsby followed behind him, wringing his hands and speaking in a low, urgent voice, but Thaddeus did not seem to hear him. He crossed the hall in long strides and disappeared through a door beneath the main staircase, the one that led, I assumed, to the cellars where the machinery was housed. Mrs. Colton told us to wait, her voice brittle, and we stood there in our night clothes like ghosts ourselves, shivering and silent. I do not know how long we waited. It might have been 10 minutes. It might have been an hour. Time felt strange in that cold darkness, as if the house had slipped outside the ordinary flow of things. I kept my candle steady and tried not to think about what would happen if the system could not be repaired, if the house remained cold and dark, if we were all turned out into the November night with nowhere to go. I had been here less than a day. I had not even proven my worth. I would be the first to be dismissed. Then I felt it. A presence, cold and insistent, like a hand on my shoulder, though no one stood near me. I turned my head and saw her. She stood at the far end of the hall, near the entrance to the east wing, a woman dressed in white, her gown old-fashioned, even by the standards of 3 years ago, her hair unbound and falling over her shoulders like dark water. Her face was pale, beautiful in the way that broken things are beautiful. and her eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. No one else seemed to see her. The other servants stood facing the cellar door, waiting for news, oblivious. But she was there, as real as the cold, as real as my own fear. She raised one hand, and I saw that her fingers were stained with something dark, soot or oil or blood. I could not tell. She beckoned to me. Once, twice. Then she turned and walked toward the east wing, her movements smooth and soundless, as if she were gliding just above the floor. I should have been terrified. I should have screamed or fainted or done any of the things a rational woman would do when confronted with the impossible. But I did not. Instead, I felt a strange pull, a certainty that she wanted me to follow, that she had something to show me, something important. I glanced at Mrs. Colton, at the others, and then I stepped away from the group, moving quietly toward the corridor where the woman in white had disappeared. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. The east wing was forbidden, but I did not care. I followed the apparition through a maze of dark hallways, my candle casting wild shadows on the walls, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. She stayed just ahead of me, always visible, always beckoning, and I realized with a cold shock that she was leading me downward, toward the cellar, toward the very heart of the system that had failed. We descended a narrow staircase I had not known existed, spiraling down into the bowels of the house, and the air grew warmer, thick with the smell of coal and metal and something else, something bitter and chemical that made my eyes water. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy iron door, and the woman in white passed through it as if it were made of mist. I hesitated, my hand on the latch, and then I heard voices on the other side. Thaddeus Ashford's voice, low and strained, and Mr. Grimsby's, higher, more nervous. I should not be here, I thought. I should turn back. But the woman's presence was still there, a cold insistence pressing against my mind, and I knew I could not leave. Not yet. I pushed the door open, just enough to see inside. The machine room was a cathedral of iron and steam, a vast space filled with pipes and valves and great cylindrical boilers that rose toward the ceiling like the pillars of some pagan temple. Lanterns hung from hooks, casting a dim and flickering light, and in the center of it all stood Thaddeus Ashford, his hands black with grease, his face drawn and pale as he stared at the silent machinery. Mr. Grimsby stood beside him, holding a lamp, his expression a mixture of fear and calculation. "It cannot simply stop," Thaddeus was saying, his voice rough. "The system has redundancies, fail-safes. Something has been tampered with." Mr. Grimsby made a sound that might have been agreement or protest. "Perhaps a valve jammed, sir. Perhaps the coal was damp. These things happen. Not to my system," Thaddeus said, and there was such absolute conviction in his voice that I believed him. Not like this. Not all at once. He turned away from Grimsby and began examining the nearest boiler, running his hands over the pipes and fittings with a tenderness that was almost heartbreaking, as if he were touching something beloved and wounded. I watched him, hidden in the doorway, and felt a strange ache in my chest. This was not just an engineer inspecting his work. This was a man trying to save the only thing he had left. Then the woman in white appeared again, standing beside one of the far boilers, near a cluster of valves half hidden in shadow. She pointed, her finger steady, her eyes still fixed on me. I understood. She was showing me something Thaddeus had not yet seen. I did not think. I simply moved. I stepped into the machine room, my candle held before me, and both men turned to stare at me with identical expressions of shock. "What are you doing here?" Mrs. Colton's voice would have said, but it was Thaddeus who spoke, and his voice was not angry, only bewildered. "Who are you?" "I am Calla Brennan, sir," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I am the new housemaid. I followed something down here. I thought I could help." "Help," Mr. Grimsby repeated, and he laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A housemaid. Mr. Ashford, I will escort her back upstairs." But Thaddeus did not move. He was staring at me with those storm-gray eyes, and I felt as if he were seeing through me, past the servant's dress and the unbound hair and the impropriety of my presence, to something deeper. "Wait," he said. "How did you get in here? This door was locked." "It was open," I lied, because I could not tell him about the woman, about the ghost that no one else seemed to see. "I came down the east wing staircase. I thought I heard something." "That staircase has been sealed for 2 years," Thaddeus said. And now there was something sharp in his voice, something that might have been suspicion or might have been fear. "No one uses it." I did not know what to say. I turned toward the cluster of valves where the woman had pointed, desperate to change the subject, to make my intrusion worthwhile. "Sir," I said, "have you checked those valves there? The ones near the secondary boiler?" Thaddeus followed my gaze, frowning. "Those are safety valves," he said. "They are designed to release pressure, not to shut the system down." "But what if someone closed them manually?" I said, the words coming faster now, my father's voice in my head, teaching me about pressure and flow and the 1,000 ways metal could fail or be made to fail. If the primary and secondary valves were both closed at the same time, the system would have nowhere to equalize. It would shut down automatically to prevent an explosion. Thaddeus stared at me. Then, without a word, he crossed the room and crouched beside the valves I had indicated. I saw his hands move, testing, turning, and then he went very still. His head dropped forward as if he had been struck. "They have been closed," he said, his voice barely audible. "Both of them. Deliberately. Mr." Grimsby came closer, holding the lamp high. "That is impossible, sir. No one would do such a thing. Perhaps they were jarred loose, perhaps the vibrations over time." "These valves require a key," Thaddeus said, and he stood, holding up a small brass valve key that had been left hanging from one of the fittings, as if the person who had used it had not bothered to hide the evidence. Someone did this. Someone sabotaged the system. The silence that followed was terrible. I saw Mr. Grimsby's face go pale, saw the calculation behind his eyes, the quick assessment of what this meant. And I knew, suddenly and with perfect clarity, that he had known. Perhaps he had not done it himself, but he had known it would happen. He had been too calm, too unsurprised by the failure. Thaddeus turned to me, and there was something raw in his expression, something that looked almost like gratitude and pain mixed together. "How did you know?" he said. "How did you know where to look?" I could not tell him the truth. I said, "I grew up in a smithy, sir. My father taught me about pressure systems. I saw the valve configuration and thought it looked wrong. He studied me for a long moment, and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Then he nodded once and turned back to the machinery. "Help me," he said. "If we open these valves and restart the primary furnace, we can have the system running again within the hour." "Mr. Grimsby protested, something about propriety and servants and the danger of involving someone untrained, but Thaddeus ignored him. He handed me a wrench and showed me which fittings to loosen while he worked on the furnace, and for the next hour we labored side by side in that cathedral of iron, our hands moving in a rhythm that felt older than words, older than class or propriety or fear. He did not speak to me except to give instructions, but I felt his presence beside me like heat, like gravity, and I knew that something had shifted between us, something that could not be taken back. When the first boiler rumbled to life and the pipes began to hum with returning pressure, I saw him close his eyes just for a moment as if offering a prayer of thanks to whatever God watches over engineers and broken things. Then he looked at me, and there was something in his face I could not name. "You saved it," he said quietly. "You saved the house." "I only found what was broken, sir," I said. But my voice shook because I knew it was not true. I had been led here. I had been shown. And I did not yet understand why. We climbed back upstairs together, Thaddeus and I, with Mr. Grimsby following in sullen silence. The lamps were beginning to glow again, faint at first, then brighter, and I heard murmurs of relief from the servants still gathered in the hall. Mrs. Colton's eyes found me and narrowed with suspicion, but she said nothing. She could not when the master himself stood beside me, his shirt still stained with grease, his expression unreadable. "Go to bed," he told the others. "The system is restored. There is nothing more to be done tonight." They dispersed slowly, reluctantly, and I turned to go as well. But his voice stopped me. "Miss Brennan," he said, and I turned back. He was looking at me with those gray eyes, and I felt something dangerous unfold in my chest, something that had no place in the heart of a housemaid. "Tomorrow," he said, "I would like to speak with you properly. There are questions I need to ask." "Yes, sir," I said, and I curtsied because I did not know what else to do. I climbed the stairs to my small room, my hands still smelling of oil and metal, my mind spinning. The woman in white had not appeared again, but I knew she was still there, somewhere in the house, waiting. She had shown me the truth tonight, but I understood that it was only the beginning. There were more secrets buried in the walls of Ashford Manor, more ghosts than just hers, and I had been chosen, somehow, to bring them into the light. I lay down in my narrow bed and pulled the blanket over me, listening to the restored hum of the system beneath the floors, and I knew that sleep would not come easily, because I had touched his hand in the machine room just once when he passed me a wrench, and the heat of that touch, brief and accidental and improper, had burned itself into my skin like a brand. I was summoned to his study at noon the next day, and I went with my heart in my throat and my hands scrubbed raw from the morning's work. Mrs. Colton had not spoken to me directly since the night before, but her silence was more damning than any reprimand. She moved through the house like a bird of prey, her eyes following me, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. The other servants whispered when they thought I could not hear, and I caught fragments of their speculation. How had I known about the machinery? Why had Mr. Ashford allowed me to help? What was I really? I kept my head down and scrubbed the floors and tried to make myself invisible, but it was too late for that. I had been seen. The study was in the east wing, on the second floor, and the door stood open when I arrived. I knocked anyway, softly, and heard his voice from within. "Come in, Miss Brennan." The room was nothing like I had imagined. I had expected something cold and mechanical, full of diagrams and instruments, but instead I found a space that felt almost alive with warmth. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, leather-bound and worn with use, and a fire burned in the grate despite the system having restored the heat. There were tables covered with sketches and models, gears and springs scattered across surfaces like the fragments of some dismantled clock, and in the center of it all stood Thaddeus Ashford, dressed now in a proper coat and vest, his dark hair combed back, his face composed. He looked like a gentleman again, not the desperate man I had worked beside in the machine room, and I felt the distance between us reassert itself like a physical barrier. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. I hesitated, because servants do not sit in the presence of their employers, but he was looking at me with an expression that was not quite a command and not quite a request, and I found myself obeying. He sat across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together, and for a moment he said nothing. He simply studied me, and I felt my face grow warm under his gaze. "I owe you an apology," he said at last, and I blinked in surprise. "Last night I was abrupt with you. I did not thank you properly for what you did. Without your help, the damage to the system could have been catastrophic. The investors were arriving this morning to inspect the machinery, and if they had found it inoperable, I would have lost everything. My reputation, my patents, my ability to continue my work. You saved more than the house, Miss Brennan. You saved my life's work." I did not know what to say. I had not expected gratitude, and certainly not this kind of raw honesty. I said, "I only did what anyone with knowledge of such systems would have done, sir." "But you are not anyone," he said quietly. "You are a housemaid. Where did you learn to work with machinery?" I told him then, because there seemed no point in hiding it. I told him about my father, about the forge and the small engine repairs he had taken on to supplement his income, about the hours I had spent watching him and learning from him, even though he knew it would do me no good. "A woman cannot be an engineer," he had told me once, his voice sad, "but I can teach you anyway, because knowledge is never wasted. even if the world does not let you use it. Thaddeus listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father was right. Knowledge is never wasted. And I find myself in an unusual position, Miss Brennan. I need someone I can trust to help me understand what happened last night. Someone with the skill to assist me in inspecting the entire system for further sabotage. Mrs. Colton will object, of course, and there will be talk among the staff, but I am willing to endure that if you are." I stared at him. "You want me to help you?" "I want you to work with me," he said. "Not as a housemaid, as a technical assistant. The pay would be better, and the work would be far more interesting than scrubbing floors, I imagine. But it would also be dangerous. Whoever tampered with the system last night is still in this house, and they will not be pleased to know we are investigating. I cannot promise your safety, and I cannot promise that your reputation will remain intact. But I can promise that your skills will not be wasted here." I should have said no. I should have remembered my place, remembered that girls like me do not get second chances, that this was a trap disguised as an opportunity. But when I looked at him, at the way his gray eyes held mine with something that might have been hope or desperation or both, I found I could not refuse. "Yes," I said, "I will help you." He smiled then, a brief and fleeting thing, but it transformed his face entirely, and I felt my heart stutter in my chest. "Good," he said. "We will begin this afternoon. But first, I need you to tell me the truth about something. How did you know where to find the closed valves? I have been over the system 100 times in my mind, and I cannot understand how you could have identified the problem so quickly. It was almost as if someone had shown you." I felt the blood drain from my face. He was too perceptive, too intelligent, and I could not lie to him, not when he was looking at me like that. But I could not tell him the whole truth either. Not yet. "I saw something," I said carefully. "In the shadows. A reflection, perhaps, or a trick of the light. It drew my eye to that part of the machinery." "A reflection," he repeated, and I could not tell if he believed me or not. His expression gave nothing away. "Very well, Miss Brennan. I will accept that for now. But if you see anything else unusual, anything at all, I want you to tell me. This house has a way of hiding its secrets, and I have learned not to dismiss anything as impossible." I nodded, relief flooding through me, and he stood, signaling that the interview was over. I rose as well, preparing to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. "Miss Brennan," he said, and when I turned back, he was standing very still, his hands at his sides, his face shadowed. "My wife died in this house 3 years ago. It was ruled an accident, but I have never believed that. If what happened last night is connected to her death, if someone in this house means to harm me or destroy my work, I need to know. I need to understand what I have been living with all this time." "I will help you find the truth, sir," I said, and I meant it, though I did not yet know what that truth would cost us both. The afternoon was spent in the machine room, inspecting every valve and pipe and fitting for signs of further tampering. Thaddeus worked with a focused intensity that left no room for conversation, and I was grateful for the silence. It gave me time to think, to process the strangeness of my new position and the even greater strangeness of the woman in white who had led me here. She appeared again as the light began to fail, standing in the doorway that led to the furnace room, her pale dress glowing faintly in the dimness. Thaddeus did not see her. He was bent over a cluster of pressure gauges, his back to me, and the ghost raised her hand and beckoned just as she had the night before. I glanced at Thaddeus, then set down my tools and moved quietly toward the door. The furnace room was smaller and hotter, the air shimmering with heat from the great coal-fed fires that powered the system. The woman stood beside a metal cabinet mounted on the wall, and as I approached, she reached out and touched it, her fingers passing through the solid door like smoke. I understood. She wanted me to open it. I looked back to make sure Thaddeus was still occupied, then lifted the latch and pulled the cabinet open. Inside were shelves lined with journals and ledgers, records of the system's maintenance and operation, all written in a neat, precise hand. I pulled out the topmost journal and opened it, flipping through pages of technical notes and diagrams, and then I saw it. A signature at the bottom of a page, small and elegant. Eleanor Ashford. My breath caught. These were not Thaddeus's records. They were hers. She had worked on the system, had designed parts of it, perhaps even conceived of innovations that he had later claimed. I turned more pages, my hands trembling, and found entries that detailed experiments, calculations, improvements to the pressure regulation and heat distribution. She had been brilliant. She had been an engineer in everything but name. And then, near the end of the last journal, I found a page that had been torn out, leaving only a ragged edge. The entry before it was dated the 15th of October, 1884, 2 weeks before her death. The handwriting was hurried, less controlled than the earlier entries, and the final line read, "He knows I intend to make the truth public. I do not know what he will do." I closed the journal and looked up, but the woman in white was gone. I stood there in the heat of the furnace room, holding the evidence of a life that had been erased, and I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Eleanor Ashford had been murdered, and someone in this house had let her be forgotten. I brought the journals to Thaddeus that evening, after the other servants had retired. I found him in his study, sitting by the fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a look of exhaustion on his face that made him seem older than his years. When I entered, he looked up with an expression that was almost relief, as if he had been waiting for me, as if he had known I would come. "I found these in the machine room," I said, and I set the journals on the desk beside him. "They belong to your wife." He stared at them for a long moment, and I saw something break in his face, some carefully maintained composure crumbling. He reached out and touched the top journal with a tenderness that made my throat ache, then opened it and began to read. I watched as his expression changed, as understanding and grief and something darker, something like guilt, moved across his features. "She was the one who designed the secondary pressure system," he said finally, his voice rough. "I took credit for it. Not intentionally, not at first. But when the patents were filed, her name was not included. She was a woman. The registrar would not have accepted it, and I told myself it did not matter, that we were married, that what was mine was hers and hers was mine. But it mattered to her. It mattered a great deal." He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes, barely held back. "She told me she wanted to publish a paper, to present her work to the Royal Society. I told her it was impossible, that no one would take her seriously, that it would only bring ridicule on both of us. We argued. The last words I spoke to her were angry words. And then she died, and I have spent 3 years telling myself it was an accident, that she fell down the stairs because she was distracted, because she was upset. But I knew, Miss Brennan, I knew it was not that simple." "What happened to the last page?" I asked quietly. "The one that was torn out?" He shook his head. "I do not know. I never saw these journals before tonight. I did not even know she kept them. Someone must have hidden them after she died. Or someone tore out the page because it named them," I said. "The entry before it says she was going to make the truth public, that she was afraid of what someone would do." Thaddeus closed the journal and pressed his hands to his face, and I saw his shoulders shake with silent grief. "I had failed her," he said. "I loved her, and I failed her. And now she is gone, and I cannot even give her justice, because I do not know who took her from me." I knelt beside his chair, improper and reckless, and I took his hand in mine. "We will find out," I said. "I promise you. We will find the truth." He looked down at me, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. His hand tightened around mine, warm and solid and alive, and I saw in his eyes something I had no right to see, something that should not exist between a master and a servant, between a man still mourning his wife and a woman he barely knew. But it was there, undeniable and dangerous, and I felt it echo in my own heart like a bell tolling. Then he pulled his hand away, gentle but firm, and the spell broke. "You should go," he said softly. "It is late, and Mrs. Colton will talk." I nodded and rose, my knees unsteady, and I left him there alone with his grief and his ghosts. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I knew that something irrevocable had happened. I had promised to help him find justice for Eleanor, and in doing so, I had bound myself to him in a way that could not be undone, and Eleanor's ghost, wherever she was, had brought me here for a reason. She had chosen me to uncover her murder and restore her name, even if it meant destroying the man I was falling in love with. The attempt on my life came 3 days later, and I almost did not see it coming. I had spent those days working beside Thaddeus, cataloging every part of the system, searching for further signs of sabotage. We found nothing, but the tension in the house had grown thick as fog. Mr. Grimsby watched us with cold eyes and spoke in clipped sentences. Mrs. Colton's disapproval had curdled into something harder, and she assigned me the worst tasks when I was not working with Thaddeus, as if to remind me of my proper place. The other servants avoided me entirely, except for Timothy from the stables, who once whispered a warning as I passed. "Be careful, miss. There are those in this house who do not want old secrets disturbed." I asked him what he meant, but he only shook his head and hurried away, and I was left with the cold certainty that I was being watched, that every move I made was noted and weighed by unseen eyes. Thaddeus felt it too. I could see it in the way he moved through the house, always alert, always listening. He had begun locking the door to his study, and he no longer left Eleanor's journals unattended. We did not speak of the moment we had shared that night by the fire, but it hung between us like a secret, changing the quality of the air whenever we were alone together. Sometimes I would look up from my work and find him watching me with an expression I could not name, and my hands would shake so badly I had to set down my tools. On the third night, Eleanor's ghost appeared to me again, but this time she did not beckon. She stood at the foot of my bed, her face twisted with urgency, her mouth moving as if she were trying to speak, but could not. I sat up, my heart pounding, and she raised her hand and pointed toward the door, then vanished like smoke dispersing in wind. I dressed quickly and slipped out into the corridor, following some instinct I did not understand. The house was dark and silent, the lamps turned low for the night, and I moved through the shadows like a ghost myself, my feet bare on the cold floor. I found myself drawn toward the east wing, toward Thaddeus's study, and as I approached, I saw a line of light beneath the door. Someone was inside. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard voices, low and urgent. Mr. Grimsby's voice, and another I did not recognize, a woman's voice, cultured and cold. I held my breath and listened. "The girl is a problem," the woman was saying. "She has found the journals. She is asking questions. Thaddeus trusts her, and that makes her dangerous." "She is only a housemaid," Mr. Grimsby replied, but there was uncertainty in his tone. "What can she possibly do?" "She can ruin everything," the woman said, just as Eleanor tried to ruin everything. We did not silence one woman only to be undone by another. My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice now. It belonged to Vivian Ashford, Thaddeus's sister-in-law, Eleanor's older sister. She had arrived at the manor the previous morning, ostensibly to visit her brother-in-law and inspect the famous system. But I had seen the way she looked at him, the way her hand lingered on his arm when she spoke to him. She had loved him once, perhaps loved him still, and she had hated Eleanor for winning him. "What do you propose, Mr. Grimsby asked, and I heard the sound of liquid being poured, glasses clinking. "We cannot simply dismiss her. Thaddeus would want to know why." "We do not need to dismiss her," Vivian said. "Accidents happen in houses with complex machinery. Valves fail, boilers explode. It would be a tragedy, of course, but these things cannot always be prevented." I did not wait to hear more. I turned and ran, my bare feet soundless on the floor, my mind racing. They had killed Eleanor. Vivian and Grimsby together, because Eleanor had threatened to expose the truth about the patents, about the system, about Thaddeus's borrowed genius, and now they meant to kill me for the same reason. I reached my room and locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to think. I could go to Thaddeus, tell him what I had heard, but would he believe me? Vivian was family, and Grimsby had served the estate for years. I was a housemaid who had been here less than a week, and if I accused them without proof, they would simply deny it, and I would be the one cast out into the November cold with nothing. I needed proof. I needed something undeniable. Eleanor's ghost appeared again, standing by the window, and this time I spoke to her aloud. "Tell me where to look," I whispered. "Show me what I need to find." She pointed toward the floor, toward the boards beneath the window, and I understood. I knelt and ran my hands over the wood, searching for a seam, a gap, anything that might indicate a hiding place. My fingers found a loose board, and I pried it up carefully, my heart hammering. Beneath it was a small space, and inside that space was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle with age. I lifted it out and unfolded it with trembling hands. It was the missing page from Eleanor's journal, the entry from 2 weeks before her death. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, and as I read, I felt tears sting my eyes. Vivian came to me today and demanded I abandon my plans to publish my work. She said it would embarrass the family, that no one would take me seriously, that I would make Thaddeus a laughingstock. But I know the truth. She wants Thaddeus for herself, and she cannot bear that he chose me. She has always been jealous, always cruel beneath her polished manners. I told her I would not be silenced. I told her the world deserved to know what I have accomplished, regardless of my sex. She left my study white with rage, and I heard her speaking to Grimsby in the corridor afterward, their voices too low for me to make out the words. I am afraid. I am afraid of what she might do, but I will not surrender. I will not let them erase me. The page ended there, and I sat back on my heels, the proof in my hands. Eleanor had known. She had known Vivian meant her harm, and she had hidden this page, perhaps hoping someone would find it, perhaps knowing her time was running out. I had to show this to Thaddeus, but as I moved toward the door, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside, slow and deliberate, and then the sound of a key turning in a lock. My lock. I stared at the door, frozen, as it swung open and Mr. Grimsby stepped inside, his face expressionless, a heavy wrench in his hand. "Miss Brennan," he said quietly, "I am sorry it has come to this. You seem a decent girl, but you should have stayed in your place." I backed away, clutching Eleanor's journal page to my chest, and he advanced slowly, closing the door behind him. "There will be an accident," he said, "a terrible accident. The machinery can be so dangerous for those who do not understand it. Mr. Ashford will be devastated, of course, but he will recover. He always does." He raised the wrench, and I knew I had only seconds. I lunged for the window, throwing it open, and screamed with every ounce of breath in my body. Thaddeus's name, over and over, a cry for help that tore from my throat like a prayer. Grimsby grabbed my arm, yanking me back, and I fought him with a desperation I had never known I possessed. I clawed at his face, kicked at his legs, and the journal page fell from my hands and fluttered to the floor. He struck me across the face with the back of his hand, and I tasted blood, felt my vision blur, but I did not stop screaming. Then the door burst open and Thaddeus was there, his face white with fury, his eyes wild. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled Grimsby away from me with such force that the man stumbled and fell. Thaddeus stood over him, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. "If you ever touch her again," he said, his voice low and deadly, "I will kill you myself." Grimsby scrambled to his feet, his composure shattered. "She is lying," he said desperately. "She is mad. She is seeing things. She has been filling your head with nonsense about Eleanor." Thaddeus bent and picked up the journal page from the floor. He read it in silence, and I watched as understanding dawned on his face, followed by a grief so profound I felt it like a physical blow. He looked at Grimsby, and there was murder in his eyes. "You knew," Thaddeus said. "You helped her. You helped Vivian kill my wife." Grimsby's face went gray. "It was an accident, sir. I swear to you. She fell. We only meant to frighten her, to make her see reason." "Get out," Thaddeus said, his voice shaking. "Get out of this house before I lose control of myself." Grimsby fled, and Thaddeus turned to me. I was leaning against the wall, my legs too weak to hold me, blood on my lip, and tears streaming down my face. He came to me and took my shoulders gently, his hands warm and steady. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was so tender it broke something inside me. I shook my head, unable to speak, and he pulled me into his arms. I felt his heartbeat against my cheek, fast and hard, and I let myself collapse against him, let myself be held for the first time since my father died. We stood like that for a long moment, and I knew that every rule we had lived by, every boundary between us, had been burned away in the space of those terrible minutes. "I am sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I am so sorry I did not protect you. I am sorry I did not see the truth sooner." "You could not have known," I said, my voice muffled against his chest. "No one could have known." "But I should have," he said, and I heard the anguish in his voice. "I should have believed Eleanor when she told me Vivian hated her. I should have fought for her, defended her, let her take credit for her own brilliance. Instead, I let her be erased. And then I let myself believe her death was an accident because it was easier than facing the truth. I failed her, Calla. I failed her in every way that mattered. He had used my given name, and I felt the intimacy of it like a flame against my skin. I pulled back just enough to look up at him, and I saw that he was crying, tears running unchecked down his face. I reached up and touched his cheek, and he closed his eyes as if my touch pained him. "You did not kill her," I said. "You loved her. And she knew that, even if she also knew you were flawed. We are all flawed, Thaddeus. But you can still give her justice. You can still make this right." He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I saw in his face something I had not expected to see. Not just gratitude or grief, but something deeper, something that looked like the beginning of healing. And something else, something I had no right to name but could not deny. "Help me," he said. "Help me finish this. Help me give Eleanor the peace she deserves. And then, when it is done, if you will still have me, I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." My breath caught. I should have told him it was impossible, that we came from different worlds, that the scandal would destroy us both. But I did not. Instead, I said the only truth that mattered. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." And when he kissed me, gentle and desperate and full of a longing that had been building since the night we first met, I kissed him back and felt the ghost of Eleanor Ashford watching us with something that might have been approval or might have been sorrow, but was certainly finally permission to let go. The confrontation with Vivian Ashford happened at dawn, and it was Eleanor's ghost who led us to her. Thaddeus had sent for the police during the night, but in the gray hours before sunrise, when the house still slept and the moor lay shrouded in mist, Eleanor appeared to me one final time. She stood in the doorway of the room where Thaddeus had insisted I stay, his own guest chamber with a lock he controlled, and her face was calm now, almost peaceful. She beckoned, and I rose and followed her through the silent corridors, past the sleeping servants' quarters, down to the conservatory at the rear of the house. Vivienne was there, standing among the dead winter plants, still dressed in her evening gown from the night before. She had not slept. She stood with her back to me, staring out at the fog-wrapped garden, and when she heard my footsteps, she did not turn. "I wondered when you would come," she said, her voice flat and drained of emotion. "Grimsby told me what happened. He has fled, of course. He was always a coward. But I will not run. There is nowhere left to go." I stopped a few paces behind her, my heart steady now, the fear burned away by something harder. "Eleanor showed me the truth," I said quietly. "All of it. How you hated her. How you wanted Thaddeus for yourself. How you could not bear that he loved her instead." She laughed then, a bitter, broken sound. "Love," she said. "He did not love her. He used her. He took her brilliance and claimed it as his own, and she let him because she was weak, because she thought that was what a wife should do. I tried to make her see, tried to make her understand that she could have had so much more if she had not tied herself to him. But she would not listen. She was going to destroy everything, expose him, ruin the family name. I had to stop her. "So you pushed her," I said. "You pushed her down the stairs." Vivian turned to face me then, and I saw that she had been crying. Her face was ravaged, her eyes red and hollow. "I only meant to frighten her," she said. I grabbed her arm. We struggled. And then she fell. I watched her fall, and I did nothing to catch her. I let her go. And when Grimsby found us, when he saw what had happened, he helped me arrange the scene to look like an accident. He was in love with me, you see. He would have done anything I asked. The conservatory door opened, and Thaddeus stepped inside. He must have followed me, must have known where Eleanor's ghost would lead. His face was carved from stone, his eyes bright with unshed tears, and he looked at his sister-in-law with an expression that held no forgiveness. "You killed her," he said, his voice raw. "You killed the woman I loved because you could not stand to see her happy, because you wanted me, and you thought if she was gone, I would turn to you." Vivian laughed again, and the sound was like glass breaking. "You fool," she said. "I never wanted you. I wanted your name, your position, your success. Eleanor had everything I should have had. She was younger, less disciplined, and yet my father doted on her, encouraged her strange obsessions with machines and mathematics, while I learned to embroider and play the pianoforte like a proper lady. And then she married you, and became part of something brilliant, while I was left to wither in society ballrooms. So yes, I killed her. And I would do it again, because she did not deserve what she had, and I did not deserve to be forgotten." The police arrived an hour later, 2 inspectors from York who took Vivian away in a closed carriage. She went quietly, all the fight drained out of her, and I watched from the window as the carriage disappeared into the morning mist. Thaddeus stood beside me, his hand finding mine, our fingers lacing together in a grip that was the only thing keeping either of us standing. "It is over," he said quietly, "but it does not feel like victory." "Justice rarely does," I replied, and he nodded, understanding. The scandal, when it broke, was everything Mrs. Coulton had feared and worse. The newspapers seized upon the story with savage delight. A murder disguised as an accident, a wife's genius stolen, a sister's jealous rage. Thaddeus's name was dragged through every society column in England, and for weeks we could not leave the manor grounds without being accosted by reporters and curiosity seekers. But Thaddeus did not hide. Instead, he did something I had not expected. He called a press conference and told the truth. All of it. He stood before a room full of journalists and admitted that the innovations attributed to him alone had been developed in partnership with Eleanor, that she had been the true architect of many of the system's most elegant solutions, and that he had failed to give her proper credit during her lifetime. He announced that he was filing amended patents in her name, that he was establishing a fund in her memory to support women pursuing education in engineering and the sciences, and that he would spend the remainder of his career ensuring that her contributions would never be forgotten. The response was mixed. Some praised his honesty and contrition. Others condemned him as a fraud and a thief. But slowly, grudgingly, the narrative began to shift. Eleanor Ashford became known not as the tragic wife who fell down the stairs, but as a brilliant mind whose work had been unjustly obscured. Her journals were published, her diagrams studied, and within a year she was being cited in academic papers and engineering texts. She had wanted the world to know her worth, and now it did. As for me, I became something I had never imagined I could be. Thaddeus offered me a formal position as his technical assistant, with a salary that made me gasp and a contract that specified I would be credited for any innovations I contributed. The scandal of a former housemaid working alongside the master of the house only added to the gossip. But I found I no longer cared what society thought. I had spent too long hiding my knowledge, pretending to be less than I was. I would not do it anymore. We worked together through the winter and into the spring, refining the system, designing new safety mechanisms, and slowly, carefully learning how to be something other than employer and employee. Thaddeus was cautious with me, almost painfully so, as if he feared that any presumption on his part would drive me away. But I saw the way he looked at me when he thought I was not watching, the way his hand would linger when he passed me a tool, the way he smiled when I solved a problem he had been wrestling with for days. Eleanor's ghost appeared one last time in May, on the anniversary of Thaddeus's announcement to the press. I was in the machine room, adjusting a pressure gauge, when I felt her presence behind me. I turned, and she was there, dressed in white as always, but her face was different now. The anguish was gone. She looked at peace. "Thank you," she said, and I heard her voice clearly for the first time, soft and warm and achingly sad. "Thank you for giving me back my name. Thank you for making him see. Thank you for loving him enough to demand the truth, even when it hurt." I could not speak. Tears ran down my face, and I nodded, hoping she understood. "He is yours now," she said gently. "Love him better than I could. Love him with the freedom I never had. And do not let him make you small. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, and she smiled, a radiant, heartbreaking smile. Then she was gone, and I knew she would not return. The house felt different after that, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from its stones. The hum of the machinery seemed almost musical, and I found myself humming along as I worked, my heart fuller than it had ever been. Thaddeus proposed to me on a June evening in the conservatory where we had confronted Vivian. He had replanted it with roses and jasmine, and the air was thick with their perfume. He went down on one knee in the traditional way, but his words were anything but traditional. "I cannot offer you a life free from scandal," he said. "I cannot promise that society will ever fully accept us, or that there will not be whispers and judgment wherever we go. I am a widower with a ruined reputation, and you are a woman who deserves to be celebrated as the engineer you are, not reduced to being my wife. But I love you, Calla Brennan. I love your mind and your courage and the way you see the world as something to be understood and improved. And if you will marry me, I promise to spend every day of my life ensuring that you are never erased, never silenced, never made to feel less than the extraordinary person you are." I pulled him to his feet and kissed him, there among the roses, and I said yes. Not because he was offering me security or status or even love, though all of those things mattered, but because he was offering me partnership, true partnership, the kind Eleanor had dreamed of and never received. And I would honor her memory by accepting it. We married quietly in August with only a handful of guests, and I wore a dress the color of evening sky and carried white roses. Timothy from the stables stood as witness, along with a young woman engineer Thaddeus had hired as part of Eleanor's fund, one of the first beneficiaries of the program. Mrs. Colton attended with pursed lips and grudging respect, and I caught her smiling once, just once, when Thaddeus and I exchanged our vows. After the ceremony, as we stood in the garden behind the manor, Thaddeus took my hand and led me to a newly installed stone marker near the rose beds. It was a memorial to Eleanor, engraved with her name, her dates, and the words he had chosen with my help. Eleanor Ashford, engineer, innovator, beloved. Her genius illuminated the world, and her courage made it better. She would have liked that, I said softly, and Thaddeus nodded, his eyes bright. "She brought you to me," he said. "I believe that. I believe she saw something in you, some kindness and strength she knew I needed. And she gave me one last gift, even after I failed her. She gave me you." I leaned my head against his shoulder and watched the sun set over the moors, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The house behind us hummed with life, its system running smoothly, a testament to the brilliance of 2 women and 1 man who had learned, too late, the price of silence. I thought of my father, who had taught me to see the world as a puzzle to be solved. I thought of Eleanor, who had fought to be heard and paid the ultimate price. And I thought of myself, the blacksmith's daughter, who had been given a second chance at life, at love, at becoming something more than the world had wanted me to be. The system had failed at midnight 3 seasons ago, and in restoring it, I had restored so much more. A woman's legacy, a man's capacity for growth, my own belief that I deserved to take up space in the world, to speak, to create, to be loved not in spite of my mind, but because of it. Eleanor's ghost had shown me the way, but I had done the walking. And as I stood there in the garden with the man I loved, the stone memorial catching the last light of day, I knew that this was the ending we all deserved. Not perfect, not without its scars, but real and hard-won and true. The house would remember. The system would endure. And Eleanor Ashford's name would be spoken with respect for generations to come, long after the gossip had faded and the scandal had been forgotten. That was justice, that was love, and that, finally, was peace.